Good day everyone, this is Eti Hasana Pondaudaya and I will be continuing the discussion about post-war years, Filipino emerges as a language of instruction, 1968 to 1974. So without further ado, let's get started. Implementing guidelines for the policy on bilingual education. Now, bilingual education is a term that refers to the teaching of academic content in two languages, in a native and second language. In our case, we have English and Filipino. On May 29, 1974, the National Board of Education received the Scope Survey Report, which served as the foundation for the Soriano Committee's bilingual education ideas. The board carefully considered the study and adopted the majority of the recommendations, passing Resolution Number 74, Section 4, which received as the foundation for Department Order Number 25. The implementation instructions for bilingual education dated June 19, 1974. The guidelines went on to describe bilingual education as the use of English and Filipino independently as means of instruction in certain subject areas, with the additional requirement that Arabic be utilized in Muslim communities. All schools were required to start using English and Filipino as the primary teaching languages in grade 1. At the same time, grades 1 and 2 were to use the local vernacular as an auxiliary medium of instruction only where it was required to promote understanding of topics that could not be adequately represented in the subject's prescribed media. Filipino and English were to be taught as language courses in elementary and high school in order to fulfill the goals of bilingualism. The first phase, a 4-year transmission period, was to use Filipino as a medium of instruction in social studies or social science, work education, character education, health and physical education. It was to start from the school year 1974 to 1975 and end in the school year 1977 to 78. The second phase was to implement the bilingual education program for the elementary and secondary levels. While the use of Filipino in the aforementioned subjects was to start in the Tagalog areas during the school year 1974 to 1975, schools in other areas were required to develop plans for either an immediate or gradual shift to Filipino as the medium of instruction, depending on the availability of teaching materials and teachers qualified to teach in Filipino. For all other courses, however, English was to continue to be the medium of instruction. The use of Filipino in the previously mentioned subjects would become required in both elementary and secondary schools according to the following schedule for the second phase, which was to start in the school year 1977 to 78 and end in the school year 1981 to 82. For primary, 1978 to 79, intermediate, 1979 to 80, first and second years of high school, 1980 to 81, and third and fourth years of high school, 1981 to 82. All other courses at the elementary and secondary levels have to be taught in English. As long as by the end of the academic year 1983 to 1984, all graduates of the tertiary curricula could pass an exam in English and or Filipino as a requirement for them to practice their profession, tertiary institutions were given discretion to create their own schedules for implementation. The Institute of National Language Board members recommended to the National Board of Education that implementing guidelines be similarly prescribed for the tertiary level because Department Order Number 25 was unclear regarding the implementation of the bilingual program at the collegiate and graduate levels. The National Board of Education supported the Institute's suggestion during a meeting on November 12, 1975. Thus, Department Order Number 50, 1975 was published with the following essential section. Sequence appeared to be a feature of the guidelines that predicted problems with implementation. The phase was thought to allow materials to be written and teachers to be trained as teachers, especially non-Tagalog speakers, try to test their competence in teaching in Filipino. The proposed phase would also allow enough time for intensive information activities about the program in non-Tagalog areas, especially the Visayas, which have proven to be strongly anti-Filipino. The manual also provided for the preparation of textbooks and study material for both English and Filipino language courses. In addition, it was desired to develop textbooks for content subjects taught in Filipino. the Ministry of Education and Culture had to implement continuous training programs at the national, regional, and local levels to develop the skills of teachers in using Filipino as a medium of instruction. Also, all schools and school divisions have been instructed to prepare long-term plans for teacher continuing training and preparation of materials. Next topic is we have the materials and textbook writing in Filipino and English. So the announcement of the bilingual education policy coincided with the reorganization of the Ministry of Education and Culture and other government institutions. The reorganizations were those that affected the centralized operation of the education system. While previously all the machinery of the public school system was concentrated in the Office of Public Schools, its Office of Private and Vocational Schools after the reorganization management was delegated and transferred to 13 regional directors who were directly on the ground. Is responsible to the Minister of Education and Culture. Such an arrangement also required changes in things such as writing materials and ongoing training for teachers. In contrast to the previous practice of writing textbooks, the textbooks and manuals for the bilingual education program were prepared by three curriculum development centers or the CDC, namely the Science, Education, and Mathematics Center at the University of the Philippines, the Social Studies Center at the Department of Education and Culture, and lastly, the Communication Arts Center at the Language Studies Center at the Philippine Normal College. The textbook produced in the three centers were piloted for evaluation in various schools across the country, then revised and edited for final printing before being introduced to the schools. From the textbook writing projects funded by the Educational Development Project Implementation Working Group of the Ministry of Education and Culture, it was assumed that there would be at least one book for every two basic textbook students. As enrollment increased each year, the need to achieve this goal became more urgent, forcing the national government to approach the World Bank for a large loan. Teachers were obliged to get new training on how to use new books and materials that were produced, especially in Filipino. Consequently, before the books were made available and put to use, people had to be trained who would also train teachers to use them. For this, a network of 14 strategically situated colleges and universities for research and staff development was created around the nation. In conjunction with the language supervisory staff of each regional director's office, faculty members with training in the use of the English and Filipino materials conducted in-service training to construct instructors on how to utilize the books and manuals. Next is we have the in-service training in Filipino. But before that, let us just define the in-service training. It is the process by which teachers engage in further education or training to refresh or upgrade their professional knowledge, skills, and practices in the course of their employment. Since the first concept to teach the first 4 grades of elementary school in Filipino in 1970, in-service training of educators has focused on teaching content subjects in Filipino. With the bilingual program, the same goals still dominated teacher training in that the language program demanded language proficiency in addition to the training the instructors had received for using the materials created at the centers. Next is we have the 2 points of views on the bilingual policy. When Paul Monroe, the chairman of the 1925 Survey Commission, visited the Philippines shortly after the Second World War, Vitaliano Bernardino, a former director of the Bureau of Public Schools, mentioned that Paul Monroe was delighted to learn that the language situation in the country had changed. When the Commission advised the ongoing application of English, not as satisfactory solution to the problem, but as a solution open to the least objection, that language had been anticipated as having status and being in the process of development. The issue, according to the explanation, was that there were 9 major languages and roughly 90 lesser ones instead of just one, and none of them appeared to have progressed more than the others. The Commission did not, however, rule out the potential that future changes in the language situation could affect the recommendation's wisdom. From two perspectives, Filipino educators see multilingual education. Some consider it as a transition stage before Filipino is recognized and developed enough to replace English as the only language used for instruction. Filipino will eventually replace English at these levels, just as Bahasa Indonesia replaced Dutch in Indonesia. Once it has reached a state of development that allows it to handle the increased functions associated with secondary and higher education, similar to how it is done in Japan and other nations, English will be taught in the schools as an obligatory foreign subject when that time comes. Only if the plan is to employ Filipino with the local tongue or with English during the transition period until Filipino is finally used as the only language of instruction will the bilingual program make sense. The issue is not when Filipino should replace English as the only language of teaching for those who see bilingual Filipino in English and in Filipino as intended by the program itself. The issue is rather what curriculum structure would allow Filipino to advance alongside English so that it is ready for increasingly challenging tasks after acceptance has been achieved. According to Andrew Gonzalez, bilingualism is a crucial component of life in the Philippines, with English serving as the language of international communication and Filipino serving as the language of science and technology.